sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out are born of time and place, the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. Chapter 1. Wild Lark Chase. The moment the first missile crashed into the Skylark, Captain Jean Blake realized she had gravely underestimated the danger they'd gotten themselves into. The spaceship jolted, and a series of yellow warning messages flashed up on the screens. On the radar display, the markers showing the Lark and the Union vessel hot on its trail flickered in and out of existence in the interference, and the gravitational anomalies of the lane kept throwing both ships off course. Their pursuer was gaining on them. The generator didn't like that, Clix groaned in the co-pilot seat, his lean form hunched over the console, large black eyes tracking the numbers on the status indicator. Alignment issue, I think. Can we get out of here now? Jean frowned at the code running on the main computer screen, then at the model above, where the Skylark's current trajectory appeared atop the schematic representation of the lane, a stream of parallel lines forming a shifting and contorting chasm in the space-time continuum. We need 5 more minutes to compute a vector, she said. Although only a rough estimate, that sounded like just enough time to be blown to smithereens by an overeager Union agent. Her Talalan companion made a frustrated noise, realizing the same thing. I'll take a look. We won't get far without proper thrust. He stood, crossed the cabin with one long stride, shoved the door open and stormed out, only a few seconds ahead of the next blow from the Union vessel. The hit shook the entire ship, and this time the artificial gravity grid in the walls and the floor couldn't compensate fast enough. The impact pushed Jean to the deck, and while she grasped for the edge of the console, a bone-chilling metallic creak reverberated through the hull, making her teeth grind. She hauled herself up and punched the comms button. Clicks, come in, are you okay? One of the lamps above released a spray of sparks over her keyboard, and the next second all the lights blinked out in the cabin. The engine sputtered one last time before they gave up the fight. Silence and darkness fell over the Skylark. Jean sank back into her chair, and as the ventilation wound down around her, she took a shaky breath and started counting her heartbeats. 8, 9, 10, 11. Then the auxiliary generator rattled to life. The shrill sound of an alarm filled the cabin. Jean shuddered, swallowed the acrid bile rising in her throat, and scanned the awakening displays. Most of the ship's instruments reported errors. Their shields and the engines were down, and although the front screen flickered to life to show the immediate environment of the Lark, nothing but the glow of this precarious tunnel in space-time they'd decided was a good idea to jump into, the main computer remained offline. She killed the alarm and tried the comms again. Clicks, Alu, what's your stat, guys? There was no answer. Panic crept up her spine. They were dead in the water in the middle of a god's-forsaken lane with an apeshit agent set on offing them. How'd this day gotten so bad, so fast? Got us on the tail. Fell down the freaking ladder. Clix's words started pouring out of the speaker, occasionally dropping into silence just to reassemble into somewhat comprehensible phrases a second later. I'm afraid the generator to bring back power. He sounded pissed, but at least he was alive. What do you suggest? Jean's gaze kept wandering back to the swirling fog of the lane displayed on the screen. She couldn't shake the feeling that the void outside was watching her. The bastard stopped shooting at us, so... And look at it. Jean pushed away from the console, detaching the flashlight from the belt of her cargo pants. I'm going down there. Is Alu with you? They're on their way up. A vector? Nope. System fried first. Don't move. I'm coming. She barely walked out into the darkened corridor when a series of sorrowful beeps sounded off from ahead. With another step forward, the flashlight beam fell on her technician's angular form. No power, Alu said, crestfallen. They seemed uninjured, but their insect eyes scanned the hallway as if they were waiting for an ambush. Their squat, boxy body bounced up and down, and they waved their 4 multi-jointed, metallic arms around. Don't like it. Jean reached down and grabbed them by one long limb, turning them around and marching them across the darkness. Give me something useful. Structural integrity 63%. Life support 10%. Alu recounted, pattering forward. Without power, gravity would linger in the ship for several hours, so at least they wouldn't have to acrobatics their way through it for now. Generator and shields at 0. Engine room sealed off. Skies, damn it. Shouldn't have asked. The agent knew what they were doing, immobilizing the ship without destroying it. But the Union was usually not this merciful when dealing with Lanehunters, so Jean didn't even dare to imagine what the bastard really wanted with them. The Skylark had been lifting off, a dusty little planet in a backwater death system, when the agent had shown up. The small lane leading to the highly unstable central star of the world didn't have a name and was only identified with a row of numbers. It was the last place to expect an attack from the Union. The Empire's henchmen preferred the busier sectors to catch themselves some innocent scavengers. The crew had already been in a hideous mood, finding nothing of value on the deserted military base, save for some scrap metal and defunct weaponry. The offices had been cleared out, and the decrepit ships in the docks loomed empty. This wasn't all that surprising. The Altecs, the race that had built the place, had been extinct for 100 years because the central system of their empire had been destroyed by a forming lane. Then the Union had purged their surviving colonies. But this was a newly discovered outpost, its location recovered in files smuggled out by Lanehunters from stars nowhere. Virgin waters and all that jazz, definitely worth a trip, their source on Metalia had said, except they clearly hadn't been quick enough about it. After a few hours of fruitless foraging, Jean and her companions had climbed back into the Lark to plan a course to their next objective, hoping that one of these days they'd actually earn the price of their fuel and maybe the funds for a few necessary upgrades too. They'd just left the atmosphere when the Union airship had started tailing them. Jean had raised the agent to the lane, hoping to lose them on entry, but Jerkface had followed them in. She descended the ladder to the maintenance level with Alu at her heels, and they hurried toward the tail, along the corridor lit by sparse, red-tinted emergency lights. They found Clix standing beside the metal door of the engine room, only his legs visible as he leaned into a section of removed hull panel. The surrounding deck was scattered with cables, tools, and various diagnostic devices. Jean peeked into the wall cavity beside Clix's shoulders. Blind lads stared back at her from a sizable switchboard, and she smelled smoke. Clix turned to her and plugged the tiny flashlight out from between his teeth. The engine room is in emergency lock, and I already managed to lure in a battery, trying to switch life support back on. Jean gave an indignant grunt. That hit must have knocked out the shielding circuitry. Possible, Clix agreed. His huge black eyes narrowed to thin half-moons in concentration, and the shallow wrinkles creasing his gray face, even at a relatively young age, as typical of his people, deepened. His short white hair was sticking out in all directions on top of his head, and he lifted a hand to smooth it down self-consciously when he noticed Jean eyeing it. It's hard to tell from here. We have to go in. Alu says the room is not pressurized. The technician confirmed with a trill. They'd climbed the opposite wall and were now dismounting another panel. The metal sheet landed on the deck with a clank, and Alu stuck their arms into the hollow space. The next moment, their head also disappeared inside the hole. So, Jean started pacing. The engines and shields are out. We can't see or hear outside, and very soon it's going to be real cold in here. But hey, first we might burn to a crisp at the lane barrier if we stay too long without navs. What in hell does that agent want from us so badly? It was a rhetorical question, but when Click sighed and pulled on the zipper of his black overalls nervously, she raised her eyebrows. I'm listening. He stared at her for a second, and then started speaking with the momentum of someone continuing an argument they'd already begun in their head. I swear, I didn't think they would jump us so quickly. Well, I have to suppose that's the reason, but I mean everything else would be a stretch. I'm not even sure what clicks. The Talalan closed his mouth. Then he opened it again. I found something on the Attack's base. For a moment, Jean didn't know how to react, and Clix took advantage of her confusion to go on in a desperate tone. Remember those wrecked ships on the runway? You couldn't get in, but I did. I wanted to tell you, but I... For Sky's sake, Jean blurted out, the anger breaking through her daze. What were you thinking? We don't keep these kinds of secrets. Why the fuck? Getting all worked up won't solve the problem, you know. Jean swallowed hard, closing her eyes for a second. The words kept echoing in her mind. Calm and collected. You can do this, the voice went on, and the familiar tone was like a cold shower on her burning temper. She sighed inwardly. Of course he would think so. He always had too much faith in her. She looked at Clicks, who naturally couldn't hear any of that, but had in the meantime stopped babbling and stared at her from behind his best poker face. Alu kept rummaging in the wall, not concerning themselves with the drama in the slightest. The ship was Talalan, Clicks added quietly. Smack me twice and call me Kevin. That's quite an interesting piece of information. Jean took a deep breath. She leaned forward, glaring into Clicks's face, then poked him in the chest. We don't have time for this, but we'll talk. Clicks pursed his lips together, nodding, and it took Jean all she had to tear her gaze away and gesture towards the engine room. If only a few connections are busted, we're still good. We'll check the generator, jump-start it with a power cell, and if the engines are not entirely dead, it only has to hold until we're on the vector. Weirdo warp space-time physics will take care of the rest. Clicks switched back to problem-solving mode too. Anything to escape her wrath. We're not going to have much time with a cell, considering the Lark's appetite. Also, what about after, once we're out of the lane? Jean waved it away. Cross that bridge when we get to it. Because if the agent can follow us out, no way. Sure, just like we thought they wouldn't follow us in. Jean raked her fingers through her hair. Well, let's assume they can't, because otherwise we may go ahead and screw ourselves now. Will the cell hold or not? Are you going to feel better if I say yes? Yes! They glared at each other for a long second, and Alu chose this moment to pull their head out of the wall and offer with a cheerful tone. Alu, go in! No, Jean sighed, fiddling with her flashlight for absolutely no reason. Alu stays here and gets her eyes and ears back. I want to know what Jerkface is doing out there. Keep working, I'm suiting up. The technician chirped in agreement, and Jean set out on a jog through the ship, leaving her crew behind. Most of the Skylark's bulk was filled by the cargo hold, while the engines and the generator took up the tail section. On the lower deck, there was only space for a couple of tight storage chambers, and on the upper deck, apart from the control cabin in the bow, a common room and two cramped sleeping quarters nestled in between everything else. All in all, the vessel was 100 yards in length and a dozen yards across, a medium-sized freighter ship, although customized to a degree. Times like this, it seemed way too small for a crew of 3. Jean passed the entrance to the cargo hold, the ladder leading to the upper deck, then the airlock door, and by the time she reached the end of the hallway, the fury pressing on her chest had dissolved. She stopped in front of a towering storage unit and slid its doors open. She stood still for a long moment. The spaceship felt lifeless and somber around her. She was sweating like she was getting paid for it. With the life support out, air circulation had also stopped. Still, thinking about the cold, aggressive energies of time and space, twisting and turning around the ship made her skin crawl. Crossing lanes had become second nature to her over the years, but it didn't mean she enjoyed taking her time in them. She would have been crazy too. Those things could tear apart entire galaxies. And now they'd gotten themselves stuck adrift in one. They hadn't run into agents in months. What in hell's had happened this time? She grasped the leather strap hanging on her wrist, took a rubber ring of it, and tied her long blonde hair into a ponytail. Fuck, she stated, and felt instantly better. Don't panic, kid. Been worse, hasn't it? She removed the spacesuit from the closet and climbed into it hastily, sealing the gloves and boots into place and taking the helmet under her arm. A button on the wrist turned the controls on with a soft beep, and she breathed out, relieved. Good thing Clicks always reminded her to keep the batteries charged. An abandoned Talalan vessel, right on your hunting grounds. You know what this means. She paused reluctantly. It meant Clicks was keeping secrets. It meant he'd known what they were going to find on the Altex outpost, maybe even that they could run into agents. And he hadn't said a word. They'd been flying together for 5 years, and despite their many differences, Their teamwork had proved to be effective. Trouble was never too far, but they'd always dealt with it. Yet the moment something surfaced from Clix's home planet, the mysterious closed word Talala, everything changed. "And what are you going to do about it?" the voice in the back of her mind pressed. Jean pulled a zero-G toolbox out of the storage unit, shut the door with a bang, and set off towards the tail again. "First, I'll save your damn ship. That's what I'm going to do." When she got back to the engine room, Alu was sending an angry series of thrills at Clix, who was still tinkering with the power cell. "What's wrong?" she asked. Clix gave a tired headshake. "I dare to suggest that shorting the cables to open the door might be dangerous." "No other way," Alu objected, their small bodies still half stuck into the wall. "Structure too weak for blast. Have to maintain pressure in ship." Jean stepped beside them and glanced into the shaft. The technician was clutching the edge of the opening with two arms while using another pair to hold onto a cable running vertically down the inner hull. "Is this safe?" she inquired. "Chance of life-threatening injury, 38.3%, Alu exclaimed proudly. Jean raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. Can you seal the door after me?" The technician blinked. "Yes," they said, and dug their head back into the hole. Clix closed his side of the argument with a dramatic eye roll, but there was a distinct look of worry on his face. Jean attached the flashlight to her belt, but before she put the helmet on, she fixed her eyes on her friend for one more moment. "What is it?" she asked. The Talalan visibly winced, and it was both satisfying and scary. "What did you find in that ship of yours?" "I'm not sure yet," Clix admitted. "It's in the hold. I intended to inspect it when we were in safe waters." Jean scoffed. "Must be valuable if the Union was tracking it." "I think it is." She wanted to grill him more, wanted it so damn much, but there was no time. So she sighed and put on the helmet, breathing in deeply when fresh oxygen flowed into it. The whiff of cool, dry air touching her face was a welcome relief. She gave a thumbs up to Clix because there was no time for petty gestures either, rooted herself in front of the engine room door, and touched the comms button on the suit. "Alu, if you can hear me, go." She heard the technician's beep through the comms, and saw Clix backing up, disappearing from her view. Then something flashed on her left, and the door slammed open. The pressure difference pushed her in the direction of the opening right away, and she forced herself to remain calm as her feet lifted off the deck and her body tumbled over the doorstep. But as she sped towards the other side of the room beyond, curling up to decrease the force affecting her body, she looked around to assess the situation and screamed. "Holy fuck! Alu, door, now!" She spread her arms out to hold onto something, anything, but the bulky fingers of the suit couldn't find a grip. She collided with the cylindrical tower of the generator in the middle of the room and grabbed for the first protrusion she saw. Behind her, where the opposite corner and the Skylark's starboard side engine should have been, there was nothing. Just a gaping hole, and through that the roiling vacuum of the lane, with its infinite shining nothingness. The wall and the ceiling had cracked and twisted from their places. Bent metal rods and cut wires snaked out of the ship's body, disappearing in the fog. Jean grasped a lever on the generator's trunk. At the exact moment, the door to the corridor banged shut behind her. The current of air escaping the lower deck had ceased, and she fell onto her stomach, the painful blow at her midsection jarring her out of her stupor. "Captain?" Alice squawked in her comms. "You there? Is okay?" Jean turned around, her head drumming in her throat, eyes widening as she surveyed the damage. I'll be damned. She'd expected a broken hull, a small breach maybe, something manageable, not this. For crying out loud, kid, you're killing me here. "Jean, are you all right?" That was Clix, his voice muffled. He was probably yelling into Alu's built-in comms in his urgency. She listened to her own rapid heartbeat and counted to 10. "I'm fine. You?" "Good here," Alu hurried to answer. "What is status?" Jean turned away from the tragedy. There was nothing she could do about it for now. Keeping her hand on the generator tower, she climbed onto her feeble legs. "The bad news is that we're on half engine." Alu made a scared chirp, and Clix cursed in his lilting mother tongue. Jean picked up the toolbox that she'd dropped in her panic and went on. "The good news? I don't know. The Jenny should be fine. Doesn't matter if our drive is out, Clix shouted, this time into his own comms. Jean didn't argue. She wanted to cry. Instead, she turned on her helmet light and flipped a few switches on the generator. Her heart was still beating wildly, and from time to time her body lurched, losing its balance. She blamed it on the failing artificial gravity of the room. With a giant fucking hole on the hull, it was no wonder the grid had already become unstable. A familiar situation, isn't it? Jean shook her head, desperately trying to shut out the intrusive thoughts. Hey, what's that? After so many years of running, Jean Blake finds herself faltering when she comes face to face with her fate? I don't need this now, Hollis. Getting stuck in a lane, waiting for the bitter end without any hope of help to come, her ship flightless? She couldn't think about it. I only want to be a motivating force in your time of need, as always. She turned her focus back to the problem. Alu, can you see what's going on out there? The technician trilled a firm yes. They must have managed to connect to one of the ship's antennas manually. Agent on rendezvous course. They want to board us, for Sky's sake. Jean blinked the sweat out of her eyes and got to work. Alu and Clix had started arguing in the background, but she wasn't paying attention to them anymore. The dead section in the generator's overload shielding circuitry was easy to find, and she quickly set up some patches and bypasses. Clix had also been right about the alignment issue. Several of the cooling tubes had been jarred by the hits, causing the efficiency to drop. She adjusted them best as she could, but she needed Alu's strength to finish the job later. By the time she screwed the gaskets back on all the cables and connected them to the primary circuit, black dots were floating around in her vision. She stood, shaking her legs. I think I'm almost done. She stepped up to one of the switchboards, popped out a panel, and grabbed a bundle of wires spilling out from behind. The subsystems that had been lost with the starboard tail section were not essential for the port side drive, since Hollis had built the two engines to operate independently in an emergency. But this was the first time they had to use them like that. Agent closing in, Alu whistled into her ear. Jean looked over the cables in her hand, finding no obvious faults. Without the shield, Jerkface only needed a modest detonation to get through their airlock. Union nail ships carried a single person, and Jean didn't see more of them around before their naps went out, but only one of those brainwashed brutes and their fancy weapons could overpower them easily. Well, Alu might be able to put up a fight purely due to their physical fortitude. They couldn't, or more precisely wouldn't, hurt a fly, though, which wasn't much help in the kind of life or death struggle their situation was turning into. What every Lanehunter Union confrontation always turned into. The Skylark lurched again, and Jean knew immediately that it was different from the small shakes of the last few minutes. Those had been caused by their trajectory regressing and the ship approaching the unstable barrier zone of the lane. This was a sign that the agent had started the docking maneuver. They must have thought themselves a fantastic pilot to attempt something like this inside a lane. Clix, you can connect the power cell, Jean called out, her voice dull through the fear thumping in her head. No answer. The ship shook again. Right about now, or we're not going anywhere. Silence. Jean shivered. What was happening out there? Maybe the agent had already docked. Maybe they'd gotten to her crew. Why else wouldn't those two idiots respond? The seconds ticked by, and Jean counted to 30, frozen into place. Then one of the displays fixed to the hull beside her blinked to life. Slowly, one after the other, all the systems came back online. What was left of the engine coughed and started working again, and the Skylark flinched, as if spreading out her wings. The door to the room flung open, prompting Jean to grab for the nearest solid object, but no air rushed in this time. The shields must have been distorted. She waited for another second, then ran out into the corridor. The first thing she saw was several wires coiling out from the maintenance tunnel where Clix had worked before, like he had eviscerated some great metal beast. She took off her helmet, pulled the spacesuit down to her waist so she could move more freely, and followed the cables towards the cargo hold, where they disappeared in the dark. But before she could have found where they led, the ship trembled again. A dull clank from the direction of the airlock indicated that the outer hatch was under some sort of stress. Jean spun around to run there, but someone collided into her from behind. Captain! Jean grabbed Clix's shoulders so they both managed to keep their balance. What in hell is happening? She cried. Why didn't you answer? The Talalan sent a wary glance towards the hold. You can shout at me all you want later, but there's only a flimsy hatch and Alu between us and the agent. You weren't ready, and I had to find another way. Now, help me get us out of here. Jean stared back at him. Another way? Then she realized. She hadn't seen the Jenny come back online, only the engine and the computers. So where was the Skylark getting power from? There was no time to argue. They were flying, and that was the important thing. I'm not leaving Alu here with that jerk, she said. I know they can be convincing when they want to be, but against an agent... Clicks shook his head. We can avoid close combat if we're fast enough. Jim felt her hand ache. She was still grabbing onto Clicks with an iron grip, pale fingers whitening in the effort. She released him, hesitating only for one more moment, then nodded. Back in the control room, she flung herself into her chair, taking in the system diagnostics running on the maze screen. Clicks settled beside her with an anxious frown. Life support was working at 40%, and their shields were up, but apart from keeping them pressurized, they couldn't do much for protection. The tortured engine did its best, but the Jenny stayed silent. Whatever Clicks's another way was, it provided power for the entire ship. The Lalam magic science, I tell you. If you survive this, smack him on the forehead for me. Jin typed in a row of code to recalculate their vector, and a moment later, the Skylark changed course. Where are we going? Clicks asked. Stars know, but it's the only exit we can reach with our current thrust. The comms creaked, and Alu's voice called out. Agent returned to nail ship. Jean snorted. Feeling the heat, I bet. Good luck with that. No, but look. Clicks pointed at the status indicator that showed the Skylark's schematic image with the nail ship still attached to them. They want to pedal out on our back. Jean swore loudly. There was no way that, on top of everything else going wrong, the Lark's engine could keep up with the extra mass and imbalance. If they couldn't shake the bastard off, they'd all die. A focused energy burst on the shield might get them off, Clicks lamented. Or it might burn down the whole system. At this rate, that might happen either way. It doesn't mean... The comms croaked again. Alu will do, locally. That's not... Clicks started, but a sharp beep interrupted him. Will do. Less risk. Chance of life-threatening injury 74.4%. Jean scowled at the speakers and inhaled, but Alu didn't wait for her and cut the line. I'll help them. Clicks jumped up. If I tune the manipulator differently and... Manipulator? Clicks froze. The thing I took from that planet? Please, Jean, let's save ourselves, then I will explain. Jean let out another curse. Go, she yelled, and Clicks gave a curt nod, slipping out of the control room. And be careful for Star's sake. The energy burst appeared on the status indicator 2.5 minutes later, and the Skylark tilted when the pulse knocked out the docking mechanism of the nail ship. But it looked like they finally got rid of their hitchhiker, and if Jean were lucky, the lane would kill the agent before they found another vector. The comms stayed silent, and she forced herself not to jump up and check on her crew. The pearly white fog thickened in front of the ship, and her stomach lurched from the sudden gravity shifts. As the Skylark climbed the end of the vector, Agent Jerkface and their nail ship disappeared behind them in the interference. She adjusted their course. The vector seemed stable, but she followed its changes closely, tracking the energy levels of those strange, exotic particles forming and decaying in the fog. As they got closer to the transition into normal space, the tiniest mistake could cost their lives. The ship sped forward, almost as if half their engine wasn't torn off, almost as if the lane wanted to spit them out of itself. And when the fog cleared, and the bright blue void turned into starry blackness with one final familiar jolt, Jean closed her eyes and started whispering the only prayer Hollis had taught her.